just one other note before I introduce the panel. These gentlemen produced hours of content that cover every aspect of transitioning from corporate security into corporate security from a law enforcement background or from a military background. And these resources are all linked on this slide that you see in front of you right now. I will circulate these links with the recording, and I just encourage everyone, if you're planning your transition, please review these resources. And if you're seeking to take your career to the next level, I believe you'll also find a lot of really excellent information there. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So let's start with Carlos. Carlos Francisco is a security executive with 23 years of experience in major corporations. He's also the host of the Corporate Security Translator podcast, and he's an author of a forthcoming book called So You Want to Get Into Corporate Security. Carlos, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Awesome to be here, man. I'm excited to be in this tremendous panel of amazing folks. So I'm ready to kick this thing off. Excellent.
Thank you. And we'll move next to Brian Tuscan. Brian's a security executive. He has more than 20 years of experience in the private sector. He previously served as a police officer, member of the SWAT team, and as a detective. And he's also the founder of Cop to Corporate, Life After Law Enforcement. Brian, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I'm just thrilled to be with my good friends, Scott and Carlos. So thanks for having me on this panel. And I can't wait to provide insights along with my professional peers here on transitioning for many that I assume that are on the call, that are on the fence to retire or just leave mid-career like I did. And hopefully we'll have some insights that will help you make that decision.
Thank you, Brian. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Scott Walker. He's a licensed private investigator. He has years of corporate security experience in Silicon Valley. He's also very active with As Is, and he hosts a video interview series called How to Transition from Law Enforcement to Corporate Security. Welcome, Scott. Scott, I think your audio might be muted.
Yeah, it's a technical thing. You know, when you work in Silicon Valley, you don't know how to use a microphone, apparently. I was just starting to say, I'll just repeat myself.
Sure.
I'm here for the comedy, really. But no, honestly, it's great to be on this. Andrew, you've done an amazing job putting this all together. And it's great to hear from Brian and Carlos. I hope to learn a lot from both of you throughout our careers. So thank you for agreeing to have me on.
It's my great pleasure, Scott. And we can go ahead and get into the discussion. So we have a couple broad topics that we'd like to cover, and we'll do this by asking the panelists questions that cover different shades or different aspects of these topics. And I want to thank the audience again for sending in so many questions in advance of the broadcast. So the first topic I'd like to cover is some of the key differences between the private sector culture and the culture you might find in the military, or you do find in the military or in law enforcement. And I would like to start here with Carlos, because Carlos, I think you have a pretty interesting way of breaking down culture.
Thank you. It's interesting enough for me. My wife likes it every time I speak, and she says, I think I know what I'm saying. But the important things here, and I'll try to break it down real quick because we probably have a long conversation around this thing. So culture for me is like three different ways. The culture is not just about the culture where you're going to work and the different companies you're going to be in, the fields you're going to be in. So biopharm, tech, hospitality, the banking industry, they all have their own cultures. And I tell a lot of people that if you're going to transition into any of those fields, meet somebody from there, go on LinkedIn, shake hands, hug babies, and ask them about how it is to work in those places, because they're all different. Every single one of those cultures are different. Are you rigid? And do you have your soft skills that you really need to be in one of those entities? So that's culture. The second thing I talk about culture a lot of times in the book, and definitely in my podcast, are how is your personal culture? Are you too rigid? Do you have the soft skills necessary? Do you know how to present yourself well? Do you know how to write well? You, like, every time you write a police report. Probably not the way to go in the corporate world. Do you know how to talk and walk and speak correctly? Has your family ever told you that you will do well with people from different backgrounds, different ideals, and so all those things. And then the last culture, I always tell people, if you're going to transition from the law enforcement world, you have put yourself through a lot of crap for 20, 25 years. You put your family through a lot of crap for 20 to 25 years. You put everybody around you through a lot of crap for 20 to 25 years. Is your family ready for you to challenge yourself again, because it's a learning, it's a curve, it's a learning. That's a steep curve that you're going to have to learn when you first get into the corporate world. Is your family on board, your kids on board, everybody on board? You might have to move. You might have to, work hard at night afterwards to just understand your culture. You're going to take a lot of notes right in the office because they have their own systems of communication. They have their own, I call them algorithms of corporate that you're going to have to learn how to speak, how to talk, and how to walk. So you're going to have to work hard for that. Is your family on board once again for you to go and continue to challenge yourself? And those are the three culture things that I break down. I'll start the group there, and then we could probably venture.
Thank you for that, Carlos. And I'm wondering if we could flip the discussion over here to Brian. So Brian, Carlos touched on some different aspects of personal and corporate culture. I'm wondering if you can share any of the perceptions you might have encountered in the corporate sector that they have about law enforcement officers or members of the military. And if any of those perceptions are negative or just maybe a little bit below what's expected, do you have any advice on overcoming those perceptions?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a great comparison and analogy, Carlos. I appreciate that. So I just want to let the audience know, I don't have a military background. If you include my high school ROTC with the Air Force, which I heard doesn't count, yes,
that's 100%.
I have
110%.
Thank you. But I really come at it as from a law enforcement perspective, police, federal, municipal, and the closest to military would be military police, which is thousands of military police. But from a culture perspective of perceptions of law enforcement coming into the private sector, a lot of it depends on the industry that you're in, as Carlos mentioned, right? So I work in the technology industry. So in a technology industry, the culture is completely different than what you would find in law enforcement. I was in two different police agencies. I was in a large agency with over 2,000 officers in Honolulu, and then I came to a smaller agency in Redmond, Washington, which had less than 40 officers at the time. And when I left, there were still less than 100. But the culture was pretty much the same. Once a cop, always a cop. Now you have different levels of training, you have different levels of professionalism, accreditation, and all that kind of stuff. But how do you transcend that into the private sector? First thing is do your homework. Find out what sector you're in, right? Or vertical, as they call it. You could be in the oil and gas, which may require a more rigid type of person. If you're in the banking industry, there's a lot of regulations behind that. So if you in the banking, they love the Secret Service, right? They have a lot of the leads are in Secret Service there because they, aside from doing protection work, they do the fraud stuff. And then, in the Silicon Valley area and the technology side, it's a hodgepodge of law enforcement professionals from the Fed side, from the municipal side. And so you have to take yourself, whatever you learn and what's in your toolbox, and absorb into the culture in the organization you're going into. So this is very important. If you come in with your law enforcement culture and how you speak, walk, talk like a cop or federal agent, you're going to struggle because that is not the culture of the organization that you're in. You're going to have to assimilate into the culture that you're getting into. And if anyone has ever told you, if you met someone like a stranger at a party, a wedding, and they find out you're a cop or in law enforcement, and they're just like, I would have never guessed you were a cop. You are ready for the private sector, okay? But if someone is like, I knew you're a cop just by the way you walked into the room, just looking around, like sitting there. You're gonna have to work on some of those softer skills as Carlos was talking about. And then I'll just punt over, I guess, back to you, Andrew and Scott, because I know Scott just talks to hundreds of officers, but being ready for the private sector, whatever you're working in, do your homework. And I'll just conclude with this. I was blessed in my 12-year law enforcement career of being in many specialized units. From the SWAT team, undercover narcotics, detective, I was on the ATV beach patrol in Hawaii. I didn't just get that job, I had to really fight for it. I had to work hard for it. I had to test for it. I had to get in shape. It took me a year to get in shape to get in the SWAT team. You got to do that same level of commitment for the private sector. And one misnomer, because I've seen it a lot with, you know, some of my law enforcement buddies, when they think of private security or corporate security, they just think of Paul Blart, the mall cop, who, in my opinion, is the front line of defense, right? I mean, I would never disparage the field site security people. That is like the first line of defense. But our profession is so deep with professionalism and skill sets that is so beyond what you would see in law enforcement. But it's learnable, it's teachable. You can get certifications in like systems, and we'll talk about that later. But that's how you get changing your culture from law enforcement into the private sector, whatever vertical you want to be in. Be prepared and be ready.
Brian, thank you for that. And Scott, I'm wondering if you had any comments on, so perhaps on, you know, Brian mentioned the importance of doing your homework. And he also mentioned you talk to a lot of officers. Are you observing any effective strategies those officers are using for assimilating?
I'll steal this from my friend Elena Forrest, who talks about being humble, right? He says, hang your captain's bars at the door, right? And many people hang your sergeant stripes at the doors, hang your detective badge at the doors, whatever it is. Be humble. I've talked with a lot of people, as you guys are saying, and I'll hear sometimes like, oh, the hiring manager wasn't even in law enforcement, but they've been in security for 10 years. So there's an automatic assumption sometimes that we as law enforcement professionals have more experience that's relative or relevant to what we're doing in security. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. It just depends on the company, the industry, those things. So, and I'm going to answer, Kimberly asked you a good question in the thread too, because how do you assimilate, or how do you learn about the culture? Learning is what Brian was saying, and what Carlos has been saying, is to go in and actually ask questions and be inquisitive. But once you get there, for me, it was a bit of a rough road. I landed and was like, oh, this is a cool retirement gig. I know more than these people, and I was very arrogant, and I had to learn really quickly. Yeah, you better stow that and ask questions and be humble and be inclusive and cross-functional. So I went out, and I didn't realize I was doing this, but you go out, you find people who can be your key constituents, who can be your on your side when you need them. And you just ask them, how do you do what you do? Or what is it that you do? And be inquisitive. Kind of similar to when you're on field training and you're just trying to figure out, you know, what everybody does in the agency. You go and talk to people, you talk to the SWAT guys, you talk to the canine people, you talk to detectives, you know, and there's a lot of different detectives. You know, do you want to eventually go into homicide? Do you want to go into sexual assault crimes, computer crimes? What is it? You got to talk to those people. It's the same thing in a corporation. You just have to be nerdy with business, not just criminal justice. Right. And so, whereas in an organization, you have all these different specialties and different levels of expertise. Same thing with our folks coming out of the military. It's a company is no different than your military organization. In your military organization, you have somebody who's in charge of finance, somebody who's in charge of hiring, firing, or human resources. Right. So those people are the ones you want to connect with and figure out, how do they do what they do?
So, Scott, I appreciate you sharing that. And one of the comments we got from the audience is they felt that their transition had gone smoothly due to diverse assignment history with the police department. And so they mentioned regular interaction with the community and non-civilian or non-police civilian employees. And Brian, does that resonate with you? Do you have feedback on that type of approach?
Absolutely. If any of you follow my blog, I wrote something about the secret sauce to getting that great corporate job. And it's less about having this long resume, because if you take the, I don't know, million officers that you have just in the US, right, of the skill sets, there's somebody that's going to have more education, more training, more everything than you, right? What differentiates you from them? What puts you on the top? And as Armando Cabral noted in here, that his transition has gone smoothly because he had assignments that interacted with the community and other non-police civilian employees. That is invaluable. So I work for a very large software company and gaming and cloud, but it was smack dab backyard of this police department that I worked in Redmond, Washington. And so I was the technical detective and I got all the cases at this particular company. And long story short, if you read my blog on the secret sauce, if you have a great network, but also a reputation, the job comes to you. So I didn't apply to a job because I saw it posted somewhere. Somebody said, you would be perfect for a role here. And I didn't start off as the head of security. I started off as an investigator. And I talked to my wife and I was like, man, I think there could be something here. I'm pretty excited of taking this opportunity. But the job came to me because of how I impressed the corporate security group. And then, Brett, I don't want to take Bogart all the questions here, but Brent Hughes just asked a great question. What's the best skills law enforcement professionals may have they can bring over to corporate security? It just depends what you do. Like my key skill set at the time getting in was investigations. I was a really good investigator. I came in as an investigator, but the skill sets I built on the job went beyond investigations. It was technical, right? It was in the software. I was like a sponge. Anything they threw at me, I just jumped in and got into executive leadership. So whatever you do in the police force can transfer over: program management, project management. The problem is cops do not know how to articulate in their resumes what they do to transfer over to the private sector. So a typical resume would be like, I started the K9 unit and we got 1,000 catches and we found X amount of drugs and blah blah blah. No, you want to say I was assigned to program, manage, and develop a professional K9 unit, which resulted in a cost savings of X amount of dollars because of XYZ. You can find all of this for free online just by educating yourself. You don't have to go get an MBA to do that. You just have to educate yourself on how to speak in a business perspective. And I'll pause.
Andrew, you mind if I jump in real quick?
Please jump right in.
So I want to go back to the perception stuff. It was like the kickoff question to Brian. So I'm gonna go back a little bit of the perception stuff.
Sure.
Because in my book, and I'll just say that, and then anybody can go look at it later. But I talk about if you're 5 years out or something like that, you need to bring your A game to every interaction with every corporate human being that you ever meet. And you got to bring your Mickey Mouse. Somebody made a joke a little bit earlier. How come Scott and I have Mickey ears in the back? You got to bring your Mickey Mouse game almost to every single interaction with every corporate person. Brian hit it on the head. You think that person is a mall cop, that person is going to be hiring you 5 years from now whenever you retire. See, that you got to change your mind right there. Now, the perception of a cop now when you get in also is that we are very rigid. I was a prior cop, Seminole County Sheriff's Office in Florida, and then Howard Police Department as a reservist. So what happens is that we stay rigid. And going now down to Scott, and what Scott said is that we think we've learned it all, and we think we got it all down, and we think we're better than everybody else. Not everybody, please, folks. Okay, not everybody. But the reason why sometimes we as cops get bad raps when we get into this kind of world is because we didn't come in humble. We didn't leave our captain, our brass at the door when we walked in to relearn everything. We weren't ready to be vulnerable and actually tell people, oh, I don't know that. But I'm willing to learn. Can you teach me that? We weren't willing to do those things. And that's why cops get a little bit of a bad rep in the world. Now, it's really funny because, Pat Fitzgibbons, my good friend, actually, thank you, Pat, for jumping in, had a something that he said, networking, the business of the business is people. And that's exactly it. You got to start networking 5 years prior, but you got to bring your A game every time. You got to change your mind to thinking that they are just flashlight cops and you're like a real cop. Starts there.
Carlos, I appreciate you touching on that topic. And so, Scott, we got two potential topics here, but I know that you shared with me that you're a person that's currently studying for an exam And so one question I have is, and this came in from the audience a lot, is if you're a couple of years out from leaving the government, are there any areas that you should study, or any things, we've mentioned some tonight, but any certificates you should pursue, or any specific areas of study that you might recommend to the audience? I think you might be muted, sir.
Again, with the microphone, technology. So what I highly recommend is first understanding what your value is to an organization. You know, if you think, oh, well, I'm a detective, and so I'll go. I've been to all these detective-y schools, and I know how to do police detective stuff. The private sector doesn't care. Sorry, they don't care about your homicide school. They don't care about that you've been to computer crimes. Well, computer crimes maybe if you're working in that kind of unit like Brian was. But generally, I've been through all the cool guy detective schools too, and none of them are recognized by the private sector. So when you're looking out there, first thing is, if something looks good to you, look at what the requirements are. And if it has an acronym that you don't understand, like CPP or PCI or CFE or whatever, Google that. If you Google it, you'll understand what the value is. And it's not so much that they're like, yeah, you don't know anything, police detective or patrolman. You didn't learn anything in your 20 years on the street. You did, but they don't know how to translate that necessarily. So the way people do it nowadays is through certifications. And so, for on the investigator side, there's several. It depends on if you want to go into loss prevention, or do you want to go into fraud, or you want to go into banking. There's all kinds. Do the education, do the research on the position description. Go in there, look at the requirements and see what they are, because you need to understand that so that you can make that commitment now. To Carlos's point, 5 years out, that's hopeful. I don't know that many people are going to have 5 years in the very near future. So do the research now, try to understand it, get out there and look. If you want to go into banking, there's a certification for you. If you want to go into loss prevention, like I said, there's a certification for you. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. You just have to do the research. I'm working on, for clarification, certified fraud examiner through the ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. But there's computer crimes ones, there's cyber crime stuff. There's all kinds of things out there that you can start getting educated on. But do it now. If your agency will pay for it, you do that. I know the military folks that are out there, use your GI Bill. Or use whatever TA, tuition assistance, whatever they have, use it. Use it now and get those certifications out of the way.
Yeah, the DOD. I'm sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I just wanted to add a little more context, because I'm not sure how many the demographic or breakdown of who's on this call. So I'll just boil it down to there are probably just really strong law enforcement professionals that would be what you'd call individual contributors, so detective, special agent, and they're doing the Lord's work out there, yeoman's work. But you also have mid-level management, the sergeants, the commanders, the lieutenant, and then you have executive management. So if there are any chiefs out there that are command on this call, those are 3 areas you really have to look for in the discipline. I've been through every one. I've been through like a senior investigator role all the way up to the chief security officer, where I sit today. And I have found this out, and I'll ask Carlos and Scott if they've seen this in the industry, but just me personally, I've seen the higher you are in a command staff, from the chief or captain or deputy chief or whatnot, and if you retire, because most of you do retire, and you decide, I could be an investigator in my sleep, I could be a program manager in my sleep, I can do this. I have seen executives in law enforcement struggle the lower the role that they take. So what I usually just say is, if you're at the top of your game in law enforcement, doesn't matter how big your department is or whatnot, be sure the job that you take will fulfill your chiefness, as I call it, right? Because it's going to drive you nuts. I had a chief working for me that would just, he would see me in a meeting with my other directors, and I get out, and he's just like, "What are you guys talking about?" I go, "What's need to know? You don't need to know." And he's like, I need to know this, right? And he was a great guy, but it just drove him nuts. And so if you're in the executive leadership side, look for those leadership positions and don't leave. If you're out in front of the camera because there's some major event occurring, you're never going to get that level of exposure in the private sector. You're not going to get there. Now, if you get to the mid-level management, there's tons of jobs. We call that, the security management level. So ASIS certifications that Scott was talking about. I would look at those certifications. They are wonderful to get. I still haven't got my CPP. I'm studying for it because it's not easy to get. But that's the mid-level management. And if you want to be the individual contributor, right, you've got tons of stuff you can do. There's just thousands and thousands of jobs that you want to prepare for. But don't just think, hey, I'm going to retire. Now, if you're one of those people that know somebody that got that super gig, we all know who they are, and they want to bring in their buddies, great. But I tell you what, you're going to be found out if you don't know what you're doing, because in the private sector, it doesn't matter if you're great at softball, or baseball, or whatever, why you got into the special unit. It's the result you bring to the table, and it's all about the results. And unless it's unionized or whatnot, you're going to find yourself to the door. And one of the reasons I give for free all of my advice, because it's been years of coaching and mentoring. Now I just put it out there for free. So law enforcement professionals don't make the mistake of pulling the plug for whatever reason, like mid-career or even retiring early, because say, I had it with this, I'm going to get into the private sector, it's easy, and then regretting it, because I've seen it happen. So I'm really here to be as a resource to help you make a sound decision. And if you go to my website, because I saw something about resumes, right? I talk about how to write a right resume. You can hire someone to help you with your resume. There's a lot of free stuff you can go online to look at, but you have to put in your homework. Do not just send the same resume out to all these different job descriptions. You have to customize your resume to each job, especially if they have the automated systems with the bots that will look at words, that text that are in there. You have to customize it. And I see Carlos chomping at the bit.
I'm just excited because I think you're right. Look, law enforcement officers, you have a lot to bring. You have a lot to bring. Coach Wolford just mentioned that. You have a lot to bring. So, but the thing is the translation that that everybody's kind of been talking about. You have to take the job description, translate that kind of in a way into your resume. It's got to be truthful, but you have to be able to figure out each of those bullet points. What does it mean to you? And can you translate that into your resume? And then you got to be focused. See, what happens is that law enforcement officers, they're throwing like darts in the dark. And they're like, all right, if I just throw a bunch of darts, it will catch. I'll catch something. And I find a lot of, I'll give you an example. I had a law enforcement officer the other day apply for an executive protection position that we had in my company. Okay, I get it. Okay, I was a cop, right? But I don't have the expertise needed to be an executive protection person for somebody, a leader within my company. I just don't, because you have to get a lot of certifications. You have to really understand what individual security of a person, household. You have to have those certifications, and you're competing against Secret Service people that did it for 20 years. Got to remember.
But Carlos, I can carry a gun.
Well, I know, but you're not going to need it. I mean, it's
Nope.
like, so that's the thing. So you got to be really focused on what you want. We could probably go on this forever. There's a lot of great entry positions, like leadership positions, management positions, like Brian said, at different levels. Those are great because you're leading folks. Investigative style positions in the corporate world, those are great for you because cops do a lot of investigations. So that could be a great entry point for you as well. And it depends where you are in your heart. I talked about your personal culture. Do you want to still move up, or are you just looking for like that side gig and give a little bit of what you know to a company and help them out through the process? Hey, it's okay too. You can perform at that level. You just let them know, look, I'm here to help you, boss. I'm not looking to do anything else. This is exactly where I need to be. I can take care of my family at this level. I can take care of this, that, and the other thing. So I'm good to go. But we could go on forever. But sorry, didn't mean to be chomping at the bit.
No, it's okay. I love the enthusiasm, Carlos. And from Brian and Scott too. And so just a couple key points that have come out of this discussion. One is to make sure that your resume that you're submitting for a job is closely tailored to that job. Brian touched on the importance of identifying KPIs or metrics. What are the results that you achieved, not just what did you do? And the just descriptions on the resume, the keywords, right? A lot of times these automated resume analyzing programs are looking for words on your resume that match to the job description. And you could get screened out by a robot just because you didn't use the right words. And so, Scott, I wanted to ask you just one follow-up question here. We focus a lot on from the law enforcement side. As I recall, you have some military service in your background. Do you have any take on this advice that maybe applies a little bit more specifically to members of the military?
Not anything different. I mean, look, DOD's done a lot to help service members transition. It's okay. The best thing that you're going to do is you're going to find somebody from your old unit who was there before, years before you, and is working in the private sector, and you're going to go ask them. You can waste time on skill advisor or whatever it is. SkillBridge, yeah, you can waste time there, or you can actually go talk to somebody. I would spend more time talking to people and less time shotgunning your resume out, or even trying to tweak it for every single job out there. Go talk to people. Join an association. Go to the meetings. Participate. People are asking questions in the chat as well about how do I get experience? How do I do this? How do I do that to show that I have the knowledge and the experience to do it? Volunteer is how you do it. You have the experience. Don't worry. You've got it. You don't have to go, get a second or third job to try and figure that out. You have it, but you just need to convince people that you have it. So it's more about going and talking with them and sharing your common experiences than it is, I think, about going onto SkillBridge and trying to, now it's not bad to go and try and match your resume to the position description if you truly feel like you should be doing that job. You better know, and you better be comfortable with doing that job. Don't just go and make a bunch of stuff up because I think it fits and it said security director and I could do that job. You probably can, but really make sure that you're ready for that transition and you're ready to go do that job. And SkillBridge, these are all just guides. The hard work is the human work. You've got to put that work in, connect with people, do these Zoom sessions. That's, I think, everything that the guys are talking about is important. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to downplay it, but you also have to do that human work.
Thank you for that, Scott. That's a really good way of putting it. And you just reminded me what the head of the GSOC told me one time. He was in the military. He said, the military is the world's largest fraternity. Like, connect with your brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Use that fraternity.
Yeah. As cross-functionally as possible. As broadly as possible. The broader you get, the more information you're going to have. And because I've talked with people, a buddy of mine was retiring to the panhandle of Florida and was like, hey, you got any tech jobs that I could do out here? No, there are no tech jobs in northern Florida. Sorry. I mean, Carlos is telling you, there are jobs, don't get me wrong. They're just not high-tech jobs that are going to pay you $150,000 a year. That's not to say you shouldn't get out there and go look for opportunities. You absolutely should. But you got to look, you got to ask.
Thank you for that.
So Andrew, I want to tackle two questions because I'm actually typing in some links and stuff, but there were two questions that I wanted to answer. One was around someone being in a private sector meeting and just not understanding the lingo, right? Because cops and military, we speak one way. The private sector, they use a lot of acronyms and it's a different language. My advice would be anytime I bring on someone to my team and they're former law enforcement or military, I just tell them, listen, just listen. If you don't understand an acronym, ask what it is. And then in 6 months' time, flat, you'll be like, who is this person? Like, you're just speaking like, and that's the culture. And you have to be flexible to understand that culture. Just like cops, law enforcement, we're very insular. We don't like talking to people at parties because once they find out you're a cop, forget it. I don't even have to go down that. I've been out 20 years and I tell somebody I'm a cop and they're just like anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So I would just say, you learn on the job. Don't get intimidated because you don't understand what they're talking about. Just think about a civilian coming into a conversation with cops. They're not going to understand what you're talking about. Same thing goes on that way. Stephen Perkins piqued my interest with a question. He said, my experience is local law enforcement does not see value in joining ASIS International or others until it's too late. What have you seen as ways to get them to care before it's too late? Everyone's thoughts on resumes is spot on. So thank you, Stephen. I got to Microsoft through ASIS. Check this out. So I'm a detective. I'm doing all these cases for the Microsoft corporate security team. And unbeknownst to me, they put me in for an award for Detective of the Year, Partner Award for ASIS. My chief, who I didn't, and you're going to be honored. You're going to get a plaque at this luncheon for industrial security for us older people. Now it's ASIS International. And as I go to this luncheon, and I was just blown away, you know, I was just amazed. And I got the award because I helped the security team. I was just doing my job, but I joined local chapter. So if you look at local chapters, some are better than others. If yours isn't as good, get in there, become a board member, and make it better. There is such value, and I'm gonna tell you a story where a detective for the police department that I conference. It was a pretty big event, and I was out on the show floor. They had this kind of weird, funky, where they had this speaker area, and I saw this detective from my department in Redmond in the back. And so after the presentation, I went and I just, his name's Greg. I'm like, Greg, hey, great to see you at ASIS. It's fantastic that the PD supports and pay for you. He goes, yeah, they didn't have the budget. I paid for myself. So I am paying myself to go through this. And so impressed because he took the step. He took the investment in himself to learn about the private sector. And then he said, hey, I'm getting my Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. Kudos to you, because you're like so far ahead of these other officers, right? And he goes, you know, I got like 4 years to retire, so I'm preparing. So I actually coached and mentored him from time to time to get him prepared, and he landed a sweet corporate job today. He just started, like he's been in it for like 2 months, loving life. But he started 4 years ago. So Stephen, great question. There's a lot of value for, I would say 90% of the cops out there that see what we do don't understand what we do. A core 10% will go above and beyond to prepare themselves. And so if you fit in that 90% where you really don't know, you can get yourself into the league where you can be successful. Salaries.com. You go to salaries.com, you type the location, say you're looking, okay, I'm a detective, I'm at the senior level, so I want a senior investigator role. I'm looking at Atlanta, North Carolina, New York. You type it in, it'll give you the kind of scale of salary all the way up to the mean, right? And then you could figure out, well, that's kind of where the salary lands. But you also have to take into consideration the company you're working for. If you go for a startup, any startup is completely chaotic. Just trust me on this one. It's complete. So if you work in a drug task force, it's for you.
Good analogy.
It's chaotic, right? If you're in the battlefild, it's good for you. But if you like structure and you want to know where your paycheck's coming from and whatnot, you go for an older, more traditional organization,
Mature
maybe in banking, mature
aerospace.
But your upward mobility and salary might not be as on par. Now, here's what I'm talking about: the startup. I know people that are multimillionaires because they started off with a startup that got IPO, right, initial public offering, or they got acquired, right, and they cashed out. You know, we all know people who've done that, who've done very well. So that's the risk versus the reward. But from a salary perspective, the one thing I tell anyone coming in, once you agree to sign on a dotted line, somebody offer you a job, you have to be content and okay with what you just agreed to. Never agree to something saying, well, I'm gonna, get promoted next year. You have to be okay what you agreed to, because you agreed to it. If you don't, in most corporations, it's not hourly, right? You can negotiate. You can negotiate a package. Now, for you chiefs on the line, I don't know how many chiefs are here. You can hire a attorney to negotiate on your behalf. I would recommend that, right? Depending where you're at. Even in a lower level, you look at a contract, hire a contract attorney to look at your contract. And so there's so many variations. You can take a look at my website for more. And I'm not sure if Scott or Carlos want to opine on
I'll
that.
just tell to your point, your salary is important, benefits are important. You can renegotiate all those things, or you can negotiate those things to some extent. Let me tell you my story about getting stock. They said, here's the stock package, and I was like, okay, whatever. I don't know what that even means, but you accrue over time if you get stock. And it can be life-changing. When I joined NVIDIA, the stock was $14. I don't look at it anymore because it freaks me out, but go look at it, it's over $500. That's the life-changing event that you can have in joining the private sector. Not every company, that's very tech-centric. I've talked to people who are in banking, and they're like, you guys actually have a Google bus? Yeah. Facebook has more buses pre-COVID, has more buses. Sorry, Carlos, steal your thunder here, but Facebook has more transportation than most major metropolitan transportation authorities. And they drive people all over the place to get you through traffic safely. So yeah, I mean, depending on the company, they're going to do those things. In banking or aerospace or something more mature, maybe something not in Silicon Valley, you're not going to get that. You're going to get maybe a free lunch. It just depends on the industry that you're going into. And that's also part of understanding the corporate culture that we were talking about earlier.
I was going to say, understanding corporate culture sometimes is even more important than just what you're going to get paid, because you may not be a fit and you're going to hate yourself. It's funny when there's a particular company that I used to work for that I'm not going to talk about, but within 4 months I knew I was not a fit. Okay, and I was like, oh, what do I do? And then I remember why I went to it. And the reason why I went to it was because of strictly the money. They threw so much money. I said, holy cow. And by the way, if you look at this company's stock today, when I started it was $700. Today is a whole other thing. But that's a great thing about tech, by the way. A lot of the old school style of banking, hospitality, I mean, that's just not how it works in those fields. And I had a great time in working in hospitality. Which I'll just end with this. You want to learn soft skills? Try getting a job for 1 year in the hospitality industry coming out of law enforcement. And I think it will do you extremely well. So you see all this Mickey Mouse stuff over here? Yeah, I put up with that for 21 years. So trust me on this. It'll do you really well to really gather those soft skills and understand what humans are like. So yeah, good.
Thank you, Carlos and Scott and Brian, for that. And for the audience, I apologize for the audio visual difficulties there. So we're a little bit over time here. Do you gentlemen have time for maybe 1 or 2 audience questions? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, excellent. So we've covered a lot of territory here. This is one of the unique questions that came in that I wanted to pose to the group. And this person asked, how do you manage executives that violate organizational rules or regulations? Potentially dangerous territory here. Scott, I see you laughing. Would you like to field this one?
Yes, you don't. Sorry, you don't have the authority that you used to have. You can't say, show me your badge to the CEO. This is where you have to understand the corporate culture or the culture that you're dealing with, right? And by the way, it's okay to walk away from those companies that put you in too much danger. I've been in organizations, I've seen this as a consultant, both as an in-house worker. If you have a company who looks at risk like whatever, we don't care, then do you really want to attach your brand to that company? You really need to be sure that you're okay with the level of risk that an organization takes. And by the way, when you're in that interview process, that's when you're asking those questions. Pose scenarios back to them. Hey, let's say you have somebody traveling in a country that is being taken over by a military junta. You know, how do you guys look at risk like that? Are you okay with getting them out of the country, or do you leave them there? You'll find out real quick where their safety, how they think about employee safety, so that you know ahead of time before you attach your brand to that. Now, if you find out throughout your career that, oh yeah, they don't care about risk here, or they don't care about security here, you've got to be diligent about either navigating that space, like the executive that we all expect you to be, the security leader we all expect you to be. You've got to figure out a way around that. That could be by finding a champion, finding key stakeholders, people to support you. But it's not always about identify or just letting people run rampant. If that's the culture in that organization, maybe it's time to kind of self-select and find other opportunities. You may not be able to move the bar. You may not be at a level in your organization to move the bar. Maybe you're a manager, not a director or the head of the organization or the head of security. You may not have that ability to move it. If you do, great, more power to you. But this is all about navigating. It's not about, hey, I need the authority to go do X. You're not going to have it. You're going to do security for your company in countries that you don't have any authority, and you're an American. And by the way, they might see that as a threat. So how do you navigate globally? It's soft touch, soft skills, and it's redirection. It's jiu-jitsu. It's the verbal judo that we all learned in the academy. I don't want to do that. I hear that you don't want to do that, but maybe we could figure out a way together how we can get this done safely. You know, it's just re-navigating how to do it. You don't have the authority. You don't have the badge or the gun to get people to do what you need them to do.
Yeah, I would think that's great, Scott. I would add, really know what company you're getting into. So if we go to a startup, right? A lot of startups aren't regulated depending on where they are in their funding rounds or series and what they have to file with the SEC, or if they don't have to file at all, right? Because you got companies out there that don't file anything because they're privately held. So I would say do your research on the companies. Now, if I understand the question correctly, it was around, you know, executives. If they do something wrong, what, you know, how do you what do you do? Well, make sure the company you're working for, what is their value statement? You know, research their corporate value statements, their mission, and go. We didn't even talk about this. Go to Glassdoor.com. Glassdoor is like the Yelp for work, right? And they'll have people talking about, hey, I have a high regard for this CEO, or they'll just type what they think about the company. And I think if it's a publicly held company, you have all types of regulations. If you look at SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, which came out of post Enron, and that all of that debacles in the early 2000s, and Tyco and all that stuff, they turned, you know, the regulations around to where officers of the company are held accountable if someone cooks the books and they find out, you're going to jail. And so they have these stopgaps within these corporations. Now, as Scott said, you can walk away if you're working for a startup and they're not heavily regulated, but you see some things that just don't make you don't follow the values. And for those of you who go to my website, cop2corporate.com, I have tons of video of FBI agent coming into the private sector and talking about how hard it is to transition because of, you know, the speak and all that kind of stuff. I have a law enforcement officer that worked for the AG's office, for a pretty big AG's office, that went to a startup, and it was a little too much, and she just felt, for a company value perspective, she wanted another perspective, and works for a really big San Francisco company. And you can find all the details if you go to my website out there. But you have to do your homework to understand whoever you're supporting and value, because just look at Theranos, right? I don't know who was the security director there, right? But she's okay.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Buddy
Okay,
of mine.
so you have all of these people get in trouble. I'm not even going to mention the other stuff. It all seems to be in Silicon Valley, Scott. But
You're absolutely right. Look at Nikola.
I'll just finish. Then I guess real quick too. I mean, companies today lose a lot of money if they have bad executives. And they finally realized that. So it's not really that crazy that they just somehow disappear or retire or resign or whatever the case may be. I mean, it just happened to Uber as well. There's some changes there. It happens to major companies around Silicon Valley. If you're not a good human being and you're not representing the company well, the stock owners are going to say it. Trust me, today is a little bit different than back in the days, and it's going to happen. So I just leave it at that.
If it's a toxic culture, you got to get out. Sorry, Andrew.
No, that's quite all right. I really appreciate your comments there. And so I think that probably takes us to before we conclude the broadcast, Brian, we know that people should find you at Cop to Corporate, Life After Law Enforcement, and we'll send out links to everybody. Scott and Carlos, anything that you'd like to promote before we conclude for the evening?
Carlos, you go first because I'll go last.
Not really promotion stuff. There was a question about safety, folks going into safety in the security world real quick. I want to say to the young lady, and I forgot her name right now, but I kind of saw through it. There's some great certifications, ASP and CSP, that are great in getting you into the security, the safety industry. It's a little bit different. Environmental health. I would highly suggest you focus on environmental health. I come from the data center world where environmental health is key for what we do. And the data center world is just growing. They need a lot more environmental health folks. So think about those certifications. Last but not least, So You Want to Get Into Corporate Security is my book. I got a podcast. Just look for the Corporate Security Translator on YouTube. Look for the Corporate Security Translator wherever you can get audio podcasts. And look for me on LinkedIn. Let's chat. And whatever absolutely I can help you with, I would try my darnest. There you go.
Thank you, Carlos. And Scott, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'll wrap this up because we all need to understand why we're here. Right. And I know Brian and Carlos know where I'm going with this, and you echo this in all of your programs. Why we're here is because 20 years ago, planes flew into buildings. Right. And so we had a huge hiring spike. 10 years prior to that, we had a huge hiring spike because of the drug war. Where are all those folks right now today? They're getting ready to retire. They've got 20, 25, 30 years on, like Carlos was saying. So they're coming into the private sector. What we are passionate about is making that transition for you as successful as possible, because what we have found it's been really evident over the last year and a half, but we have been in a crisis since just prior to 2008, right? And crises usually last 20 years. Sorry, we've got a few more years of this crisis. What do we need to combat this crisis? We need people like you that come out of public safety and the military who've got the grit and the determination and the crisis or the management mindset on when you have all hell breaking loose, you're not the one panicking. You cut fence, right? And so that skill set, hard and soft skills, is what companies need today, tomorrow, and in the future. So we have seen over the last year and a half, we've been in a pandemic all across the world. Every single industry has been affected. We have businesses that are going out of businesses, and we've got businesses that are being acquired at pennies on the dollar because they aren't making any money. So businesses are going to start to realize more now than ever that they need folks like you, not just in security roles, but in crisis management roles, in business continuity roles, in safety roles, because you all understand what it's like to be arriving at the scene of an accident, a fire, a death investigation, whatever it is. That's a normal Wednesday for you. You know, my first month and a half at NVIDIA, we tragically lost an employee's spouse who died in the parking lot. And when we heard about it, we responded. My officer did CPR on this person until police and fire arrived. And then fire department pronounced this employee's spouse in the parking lot, in the middle of the parking lot where we were doing chest compressions. They pronounced him and then covered him with a blanket and said, wait for the coroner. Everybody on the thread. How long is the coroner going to take? This is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I've got 2 employee vehicles all parked around this person who's deceased. We can't move the body. You know how that goes. So what did we do? We adapted and overcome. People who know the story, but I didn't, run around, oh my gosh, somebody died. We handled business. We had a child involved. We had an employee spouse involved. We handled it. It was our scene, by the way, because it was our house. And I told the police that. I said, keep an officer here, it's fine, but we're going to take care of this situation. And afterwards, the head of safety came to me and she said, how is this not rattling you? And I was like, this is an easy day. It wasn't violent. Tragically, it was due to natural causes, but wasn't violent. Didn't involve children. This is an easy day, right? This is something we can control. That's the mentality that we need in the private sector today and for the future. Because again, we've got another 5 to 8 years of this ahead of us. Things just like what we're having in this pandemic. Things just like what we had in the downturn in the market in 2008. We need folks who can be resilient. And that doesn't mean you come out of law enforcement and the military and you get a 20-year job. That's not going to happen. So be resilient, learn what the environment is like, learn from guys like Brian, guys like Andrew, guys like Carlos, guys and gals that are out there helping you. They're here to make your transition successful because we need you on the front lines today. And I'll leave it there, Andrew.
Scott, thank you very much. And I'd also like to thank Brian Tuscan and Carlos Francisco. And I'd like to thank the audience too for joining us and providing all these thoughtful questions, and then also the comments that provided guidance and really good advice. So as I mentioned, we had a bit of audio difficulties and video difficulties. I'm going to edit this together. So if anyone got dropped off, they'll be able to watch the recording at their convenience. And I wish everybody good luck in their career transitions. Please consult the resources that we discussed tonight and that we'll provide in the follow-up emails. And if you would please take the exit survey on your way out. We value your feedback and we want to continue to make this program better. Our next topic is going to be on June 16th on the topic of domestic extremism. We've got Dr. Jenny Hesterman presenting, and we hope you're able to join us. So from all of us, thank you very much and have a great night. Good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.